The evening had started like any other Friday night at Bella Vista. The dining room buzzed with the comfortable energy of weekend dinner service. Servers weaving between tables with practiced efficiency while the kitchen maintained its steady rhythm of orders and preparation. I was expediting plates when my sister Rachel burst through the front entrance like she owned the place. Which according to her she now did. "Where is she?" Rachel's voice cut through the restaurant's ambient noise as she scanned the dining room. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floors with sharp authority, drawing curious glances from customers who were trying to enjoy their osso buco and wine pairings. I emerged from behind the pass with 2 plates of our signature seafood risotto, nodding to table 12 before addressing my sister's dramatic entrance. The familiar knot in my stomach tightened as I recognized the expression on her face, the same predatory confidence she'd worn when claiming my college acceptance letter belonged in her portfolio, or when explaining to our parents why my high school boyfriend should really be dating someone more suited to his potential. "Rachel, we're in the middle of dinner service. Can this wait?" "No, it cannot wait." She pulled a leather folder from her designer purse and slammed it down on the nearest empty table hard enough to make the water glasses jump. "We need to talk. Now." The servers exchanged glances, recognizing the family drama that had been building for weeks. Rachel had been making increasingly frequent visits to Bella Vista, each time with more pointed questions about operations, finances, and what she called management decisions that affect the family. She'd started appearing during lunch rushes, taking photos of customer lines, timing table turnover rates, and making notes on her phone about what she termed optimization opportunities. "I'm working," I said simply, picking up the next 2 plates from the pass. "Table 6 has been waiting for their entrees. Someone else can handle table 6. Rachel's voice carried the imperious tone she'd perfected during her MBA program at Wharton, the same voice she used when explaining market dynamics to our father or correcting our mother's investment strategy. "This is about the future of this restaurant and, by extension, the future of our family's investment portfolio." I delivered the plates to table 6 with an apologetic smile, noting how the elderly couple tried to pretend they weren't listening to our increasingly public dispute. When I returned, Rachel had stationed herself directly in my path between the kitchen and dining room, her arms crossed in the power pose she'd learned during business school leadership seminars. "Rachel, you're interfering with service. Whatever this is about can wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow will be too late." She opened her folder with theatrical precision, revealing what appeared to be a comprehensive business analysis complete with pie charts, competitive benchmarking studies, and financial projections. "I've been researching the restaurant industry for the past 6 weeks, and I've identified several critical problems with how this place is being managed." The folder contained spreadsheets comparing our pricing to competitors within a 5-mile radius, market research about customer demographic trends, and highlighted sections about operational efficiency metrics. She'd clearly invested significant time and probably consulting fees into preparing for this confrontation. "The profit margins are suboptimal," she announced, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "The menu pricing is too conservative by at least 15%, the wine markup is below industry standard by 12 points, and the staffing model is inefficient compared to comparable establishments." Her numbers were specific enough to sound authoritative, delivered with the confidence that had convinced venture capital firms to fund her previous startup attempts before they inevitably collapsed under the weight of her management style. Our head server, Maria, approached with a concerned expression. She'd been working at Bella Vista since we opened 3 years ago, had learned to read the rhythms of service and the personalities of regular customers with professional precision. "Excuse me, but table 14 is asking about their appetizers and table 3 needs more wine." "I'll be right there," I told her, but Rachel stepped sideways to maintain her blockade of the service corridor. "No, you won't. Because we're going to resolve this management crisis right now, in front of everyone." Rachel's voice rose another decibel, her business school training evident in the way she projected authority through volume and positioning. "This restaurant has been mismanaged for too long, and it's affecting the family's return on investment." The dining room's conversation levels began to drop as customers turned their attention to the unfolding drama. I could see the discomfort on their faces, the way they glanced between their meals and our increasingly public dispute, some reaching for phones to record what was clearly becoming dinner theater. "Rachel, please. Not here. Not now." These people are trying to enjoy their evening. Here. Yes, now. She pulled out a document that looked official and impressive, complete with legal letterhead and embossed seals. I've had proper legal documents prepared by Morrison, Blake and Associates. As of today, I'm assuming operational control of Bella Vista pursuant to the family partnership agreement established at inception. The claim was delivered with such absolute confidence that even I felt momentarily confused. Rachel had always possessed an uncanny ability to present her desires as established facts, but this performance was particularly audacious and well-prepared. What family partnership agreement? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer would involve selective interpretation of conversations and creative legal documentation. The agreement established when Mom and Dad invested in this venture 3 years ago. She held up the document like it was a Supreme Court ruling. This restaurant was established as a family business with shared ownership, shared responsibility and shared decision-making authority. The logic was familiar from countless family gatherings over the years. Rachel would identify something she wanted, frame it as a family necessity, hold meetings with carefully selected participants, and present the results as unanimous democratic decisions that had somehow bypassed the actual affected parties. I wasn't party to any such agreement, I pointed out, because you were too focused on cooking and serving customers to pay attention to the business fundamentals. Rachel's smile was sharp and satisfied, the expression she wore when explaining why her version of events was the only reasonable interpretation. The family has been patient with your management approach, but patience has its limits when money is involved. Behind me, I could hear the kitchen calling out that orders were backing up. In front of me, Rachel stood with her legal-looking documents and her absolute certainty that she had the right to take control of everything I'd built over the past 3 years. Rachel, you don't understand how this business works. I understand how all businesses work. That's what my MBA taught me, along with 3 years of consulting experience and 2 successful startup exits. She gestured around the dining room with proprietary confidence, her movement encompassing not just the physical space but everything it represented. This place could be generating twice the revenue with proper management. Professional management based on data rather than intuition. A customer at table 8 raised his hand tentatively, trying to get attention for what was probably a simple request about salad dressing or wine pairings. The normal rhythm of service was completely disrupted by Rachel's performance, creating the kind of uncomfortable atmosphere that could damage our reputation with regular customers. The family has been patient, she continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. We've watched you stumble through running this place for 3 years, making emotional decisions instead of data-driven ones, prioritizing customer experience over profit maximization. But the patience has run out. She opened her folder to reveal what appeared to be detailed financial projections, operational restructuring plans and competitive analysis reports. Her preparation was impressive in its thoroughness, even if her fundamental premises were completely wrong. I've already identified $47,000 in annual savings through staff optimization, she announced, consulting her spreadsheets like a management consultant presenting to a board of directors. At least $73,000 in additional revenue through menu pricing corrections, wine program enhancements and table turnover efficiency improvements. The numbers were specific enough to sound authoritative, delivered with the confidence that had convinced our parents that Rachel's business degree made her qualified to manage everything from family finances to career decisions for her siblings. You've been too comfortable, Rachel said, stepping closer with the aggressive body language she'd learned during negotiation seminars. Making decent money playing at being a restaurateur, but not maximizing the potential of the family's investment. That comfortable mediocrity ends tonight. I looked around the dining room at customers who were trying to ignore our family drama while finishing their meals. Some were clearly uncomfortable, checking their phones and avoiding eye contact. Others seemed entertained by the impromptu dinner theater, watching with the fascination people reserve for public meltdowns and reality television. All of them deserved better than having their evening disrupted by Rachel's corporate takeover fantasies. I need to get back to work, I said quietly. No, you need to accept reality. Rachel's voice climbed toward the volume that had always been her most effective tool for getting her way, the same escalating intensity she'd used to claim toys, justify grade disputes, and negotiate curfew extensions throughout our childhood. I'm in charge now. This is my restaurant. You can stay on as kitchen staff if you accept the new management structure, or you can leave. But either way, the family has spoken. The declaration hung in the dining room air like smoke from an overheated pan. Customers at nearby tables had stopped even pretending to focus on their conversations. Our servers stood frozen, uncertain whether to continue with their duties or wait for the family drama to resolve. Rachel, you can't just declare yourself the manager. I'm not declaring myself anything. The family has appointed me through proper legal channels. She waved her folder of documents like a battle flag, the papers rustling with the sound of authority. Legal ownership documents, management agreements, operational control transfers, fiduciary responsibility assignments. It's all here, all official, all binding. The papers looked impressive, covered with legal-sounding language and official seals that probably cost extra at whatever legal services company had produced them. Rachel had clearly invested significant time and probably several $1,000s in creating documentation that appeared to support her claims. You don't have the right to make unilateral decisions about this restaurant, I said, my voice still calm despite the growing absurdity of the situation. I have every right. More rights than you do, actually. Rachel's smile became predatory, the expression she wore when explaining why her interpretation of contracts, agreements and family decisions was the only legally valid one. Because unlike you, I understand how business ownership actually works. I understand fiduciary responsibility, operational efficiency, profit maximization and stakeholder value creation. She began walking around the dining room like she was conducting an inspection, pointing out what she called obvious inefficiencies and missed revenue opportunities. Customers watched with fascination and growing discomfort as she critiqued everything from table spacing to wine glass selection to server uniform standards. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she announced to the room at large, her voice carrying the authority of someone presenting findings to a corporate board. Emotional attachment to operational decisions instead of analytical thinking. This restaurant could be a gold mine with proper management oversight and strategic direction. I followed her circuit of the dining room, increasingly aware that this confrontation had moved beyond family dynamics into something that was actively harming the business and our customers' experience. Regular customers who came here for the peaceful atmosphere and consistent service were getting dinner theater instead. Rachel, please. Let's discuss this privately. In the office. We're past private discussions. She stopped in the center of the dining room and turned to face me with theatrical timing, positioning herself where every customer could see and hear her performance. You've had 3 years to prove you could manage this place effectively. The results speak for themselves. She gestured around the restaurant as if the busy dining room and steady stream of customers somehow demonstrated failure rather than success, her movement encompassing what she clearly saw as evidence of mismanagement rather than achievement. Moderate profits when we could have maximum profits. Conservative growth when we could have aggressive expansion. Missed opportunities at every level of operation. Rachel's voice carried the authority she'd learned to project during business school presentations, each word delivered with the confidence of someone who'd studied case studies and believed they applied universally. The family deserves better returns on their investment capital. The accusation of underperformance was delivered with such confidence that I almost found myself questioning whether she might be right. Rachel had always possessed this ability to make her version of reality sound more convincing than actual reality, to present alternative interpretations that seemed logical until you examined them closely. You're not qualified to run this restaurant, I said finally. I'm more qualified than someone whose only training is cooking food and chatting with customers. Rachel's laugh was sharp and dismissive, the sound she made when explaining why practical experience was inferior to theoretical knowledge. This is a business enterprise, not a hobby kitchen. It requires business skills, analytical thinking, strategic planning, and financial oversight. Not just the ability to make risotto. The distinction she drew was familiar from years of family gatherings where Rachel's academic achievements were celebrated while my hands-on work was dismissed as mere labor, interesting but ultimately less valuable than what she called intellectual contributions. Cooking is only one small part of restaurant operations, she continued, consulting her folder of research like she was citing academic sources. The real value creation comes from strategic planning, financial optimization, marketing analysis, operational efficiency, and customer relationship management. Areas where I have actual expertise and proven track records. Her confidence was absolute, supported by documentation, family approval, and the unwavering belief that business school had prepared her to manage any enterprise in any industry with equal competence. "I've already scheduled meetings with new suppliers for next week," Rachel announced, pulling out her phone to show what appeared to be a calendar full of appointments. Renegotiated 3 vendor contracts based on volume commitments, identified 4 redundant staffing positions that can be eliminated, and developed a comprehensive marketing strategy that should increase foot traffic by at least 35% within 6 months. The scope of changes she'd planned was breathtaking in its presumption. She'd apparently spent weeks developing a complete operational overhaul without consulting anyone who actually worked at the restaurant, built relationships with vendors who didn't know she had no authority to negotiate, and made commitments that would affect every aspect of our daily operations. "So," she said, stopping directly in front of me with her folder of official-looking documents, "here's how this transition works. You can accept the new management structure and continue as head chef under my supervision, with clearly defined responsibilities and performance metrics, or you can tender your resignation and leave. But you don't get to continue pretending to run this place." The ultimatum was delivered with the same tone she'd used as a child when dividing up toys or choosing television programs. Absolute certainty that her preference would prevail because she declared it both reasonable and inevitable, backed by what appeared to be proper documentation and family authority. The dining room had gone almost completely silent, customers openly staring at our family drama with the fascination people reserve for car accidents and public meltdowns. I could see phones being raised to record what was clearly becoming a viral moment. "I choose option 3, I said quietly. Rachel's eyebrows rose with the confidence of someone who'd covered all possible contingencies. "There is no option 3. I've structured this transition to account for all reasonable responses. You're fired." The words came out calmly without anger or drama. Just a simple statement of fact delivered in the same tone I might use to tell a server that table 6 needed more bread or that we were running low on the evening's special. Rachel's expression shifted through confusion, disbelief, and mounting outrage like someone processing information that contradicted every assumption underlying their carefully constructed plan. "You can't fire me. I just explained that I'm in charge now. I have legal documentation. You were never hired, so you can't be in charge." I reached for the apron she'd knocked from my hands during her dramatic gesture. "But you can leave. Right now. I have legal documents establishing management authority. You have papers you printed at a document service." I folded the apron neatly, maintaining the calm that had carried me through 3 years of building this business. "They have no legal authority over anything that happens in this restaurant." The certainty in Rachel's expression flickered for the first time. Around us, the dining room had gone almost completely quiet except for the soft clink of silverware and whispered conversations as customers tried to process what they were witnessing. The family voted in an emergency meeting. The family doesn't own this restaurant. The simple statement hung in the air between us like a revelation that recontextualized everything that had happened over the past 30 minutes. Rachel's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to process information that didn't fit her carefully constructed narrative about family businesses and shared ownership. "That's impossible. Mom and Dad invested $30,000 when you started this place. Uncle Tony helped with the initial lease negotiations. Aunt Marie provided the marketing contacts." Rachel's voice carried the strain of someone trying to maintain confidence while her fundamental assumptions crumbled. "This is a family business. Mom and Dad loaned me $30,000 to start this place. I paid them back 18 months ago with 12% interest." I looked around the dining room that had become our unwitting theater, taking in the faces of customers who were getting far more entertainment than they'd bargained for. "Uncle Tony helped me negotiate the lease because he's a lawyer and I asked for advice. Aunt Marie introduced me to her friend who does restaurant marketing. But this restaurant belongs to me. Just me." Rachel's folder slipped from her hands, official-looking documents scattering across the hardwood floor like props from a play that had suddenly ended. "But the family meeting, the legal documents, the management transfer agreements, were all based on assumptions that weren't true. I could see her trying to recalculate to find some angle or argument that would restore her version of reality. But the foundation of her entire performance had just crumbled, and she was struggling to adjust to information that made her weeks of preparation irrelevant. You let me believe. You never corrected me when I said. Rachel's voice trailed off as she processed the scope of her mistake. You never asked. You just assumed you had the right to take over, the same way you've always assumed you had the right to take over anything that caught your interest. I gestured toward her scattered papers. You did excellent research about a business you don't own and have no authority over. The dining room remained unnaturally quiet, customers watching our family drama play out with the uncomfortable fascination of people witnessing something that should probably be happening in private. But I prepared all those documents, did all that research, scheduled those vendor meetings. Rachel's voice carried the bewilderment of someone who'd invested significant time and money in a project that had just been revealed as completely pointless. You did excellent research about someone else's property. Very thorough analysis of a business you have no legal relationship with whatsoever. Rachel looked around the dining room as if seeing it clearly for the first time. The customers, the servers, the successful Friday night service that she'd interrupted with her corporate takeover fantasy. The reality of a functioning business that someone else had built and owned. I don't understand, she said quietly. The family always said this was a family investment. Mom and Dad always talked about our restaurant when they described it to friends. Because they're proud of what I built. That doesn't make them owners. Chef Marco emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the unusual quiet in what should have been a bustling dining room. He took in the scene with professional assessment, noting the scattered papers, Rachel's stricken expression, and the dining room full of customers who were getting dinner theater instead of their usual peaceful evening. Marco had worked in restaurants for 25 years, had seen family businesses implode over inheritance disputes, partnership disagreements, and management succession battles. His expression suggested he understood exactly what was happening and how it was likely to end. "Everything okay out here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Chef Marco," I said, "I'd like you to meet my sister Rachel. She was just leaving." Rachel looked at Marco, then back at me, her MBA confidence completely dissolved. "Amy, I thought," the family said. "I really believed. You believed what you wanted to believe because it supported what you wanted to do." I picked up her scattered documents from the floor and handed them back to her, noting how official they looked despite being completely meaningless. But wanting something doesn't give you the right to take it. She took the papers with shaking hands, the legal-looking seals and official language now revealed as elaborate props in a performance that had never had any real authority behind it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I really thought I was helping. I thought the restaurant needed professional management to reach its potential. You thought you could take what I built because you have a degree and I don't." I kept my voice gentle but firm, the tone I might use with a customer who was disappointed that we couldn't accommodate an unreasonable request. "The same way you've always thought your academic achievements gave you authority over my practical work." Rachel clutched her folder against her chest like armor that could no longer protect her. "What do I do now? I've already scheduled those vendor meetings, made commitments to suppliers, told people I was taking over management. You call them and explain that you made a mistake. That you don't actually have any authority over this restaurant and never did." The practical implications of her presumption were starting to sink in. She'd spent weeks building relationships and making commitments based on authority she'd never possessed, creating a web of professional embarrassment that would follow her long after tonight's humiliation faded. "But they'll think I'm incompetent. That I don't understand basic business relationships. They'll think you made assumptions without verifying your authority." Which is what happened. Rachel looked around the dining room one more time, taking in the successful restaurant that she'd planned to claim as her own, the customers who were watching her navigate the consequences of her overreach, the servers who were waiting to resume normal operations. "Amy, can we talk about this privately? Work out some kind of arrangement." "There's nothing to work out. This is my restaurant. I built it, I own it, I run it." I kept my voice calm but definitive. "You can leave now or I can have you removed. But you don't get to negotiate terms for something you never had any claim to." The finality in my voice seemed to register. Rachel walked toward the exit with the careful steps of someone trying to preserve whatever dignity remained, her expensive heels clicking against the hardwood floors that had announced her confident arrival 30 minutes earlier. At the door, she turned back one final time. "Amy, I really did think I was helping. I thought the restaurant needed better management to be successful." "You thought you could take something successful and make it yours. There's a difference." She left without another word, the door closing behind her with a soft chime that seemed to release the held breath of the entire dining room. The silence that followed was different from the tense quiet that had built during her performance, more like the satisfied exhale after a difficult but necessary conversation. I turned to face our customers, many of whom were still watching with fascination and concern, phones in hand and expressions ranging from entertainment to sympathy. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "I apologize for the interruption to your evening. Your patience is appreciated and dessert is on the house tonight for everyone." The dining room erupted in applause, breaking the tension that had built during Rachel's performance. Conversations resumed with the animated energy of people who'd witnessed something memorable. Servers returned to their duties with visible relief, and the normal rhythm of Friday night service gradually restored itself. Chef Marco smiled and shook his head with the weary amusement of someone who'd seen every possible variation of restaurant drama. "Your sister. Former sister. At least for tonight. She'll be back. They always come back, usually with lawyers or family members or new theories about why they're entitled to what you built. Maybe. But not as the owner." I retied my apron and returned to the pass, where orders had continued to accumulate despite the family drama. The kitchen staff looked at me with expressions of relief and respect, understanding that the crisis had passed and normal operations could resume. As I expedited the next round of entrees, I reflected on how family assumptions could create such elaborate fantasies. Rachel had convinced herself and apparently made commitments to vendors and suppliers based on authority she'd never possessed, creating a complex web of professional relationships built on completely false premises. She'd researched everything except the most fundamental question: who actually owned what she was trying to take? The evening service continued smoothly, customers lingering over their complimentary desserts and wine, the atmosphere restored to its usual warmth and professionalism. Several tables approached me during the evening to express support and admiration for how I'd handled the situation, turning what could have been a damaging incident into something that actually strengthened customer loyalty. By closing time, Rachel's dramatic performance had become just another story in the restaurant's history, though probably one that would be retold by customers for months to come. But for me, it marked the end of letting family assumptions define my professional reality. The next morning, I had coffee with our parents to clarify exactly what Rachel had told them about family votes, ownership transfers, and management appointments. It was a conversation that was long overdue, one that established clear boundaries about who owned what and who had the authority to make decisions about my business. The conversation revealed that Rachel had presented them with convincing documentation and compelling arguments about their investment, giving them ongoing ownership stakes. She'd used business school terminology and financial projections to create an impression of shared authority that had never actually existed. Mom and Dad were embarrassed by how easily they'd been convinced, impressed by Rachel's preparation and confidence in ways that had overridden their practical knowledge about the loan they'd made and the repayment they'd received. "We never meant to interfere with your business," Dad said. "We just thought Rachel understood the financial side better than we did." "Rachel understands how to make things sound official and authoritative," I replied. "That's not the same as understanding how they actually work." It took several weeks for the full scope of Rachel's presumption to become clear. She'd made vendor commitments that required awkward phone calls to explain and cancel. She'd scheduled employee meetings to discuss operational changes that would never be implemented. She'd even contacted a commercial real estate agent about expanding to a second location. The professional embarrassment of unwinding these commitments was probably more painful for Rachel than the public humiliation at the restaurant. Her reputation in the business community would recover, but the story of her failed restaurant takeover would follow her for years. Rachel never returned to claim her management position, though she did eventually come back as a customer 6 months later, with a reservation for two and a much quieter approach to family dynamics. She ordered the osso buco and admitted it was excellent, then asked thoughtful questions about how I'd developed the recipe and built relationships with our suppliers. For the first time in our adult lives, she seemed genuinely interested in understanding what I'd accomplished rather than claiming it for herself. but she never again suggested that my business needed her management expertise. The incident became local legend, retold by customers and staff as an example of how assumptions about family businesses could create spectacular misunderstandings. It also established clear boundaries that protected the restaurant from future family interference. Most importantly, it marked the moment when I stopped allowing other people's definitions of success to overshadow the reality of what I'd built through years of careful work, relationship building, and practical expertise that no business degree could have provided. The restaurant continued to thrive, expanding its customer base and reputation without any need for the optimization strategies Rachel had proposed. Sometimes the best management decision is knowing when not to change what's already working well.
It's for your own good, Linda. This amateur work would embarrass our family name at the Heritage Festival, my mother-in-law Margaret declared, her scissors slicing through what she thought was my grandmother's cherished quilt. I stood in her craft room, watching as she butchered the fabric with her improvements, each cut making my heart race, not from distress, but from the effort of hiding my smile. My name is Linda Parker, and at 34, I've spent the last decade perfecting the art of dealing with Margaret Wells, the self-proclaimed queen of the local quilting society. She'd never forgiven me for stealing her precious son David away from the wealthy socialite she handpicked for him. The fact that David and I fell in love while restoring vintage motorcycles, another hobby she deemed unsuitable for a Wells, only added fuel to her disapproval. The festival judges expect perfection, Margaret continued, her perfectly manicured nails tracing over the quilt's surface. These primitive stitches would never win. Really, Linda, if your grandmother was any good at quilting, why didn't she ever enter competitions? I bit my tongue, remembering Grandma Rose's words. Sometimes, sweetheart, the best victory is the one only you know about. My grandmother had been my rock, raising me after my parents' accident when I was 12. She taught me everything: cooking, gardening, and most importantly, the art of quilting. But not just any quilting. Rose Mitchell had a secret technique, one passed down through generations of women in our family. You're right, Margaret, I said softly, watching her pause mid-cut, clearly surprised by my easy agreement. Grandma never did enter any competitions. What I didn't mention was that Rose Mitchell's quilts were actually highly sought after by collectors who recognized her unique signature pattern. A subtle, almost invisible variation in the stitching that made her quilts not just beautiful, but valuable pieces of folk art. Only a handful of her quilts existed, and fewer still had her special pattern. Margaret's eyes narrowed at my compliance. She was used to our subtle battles, my quiet resistance to her attempts to improve everything about me. Well, she said, clearly thrown off balance, I'm glad you're finally seeing reason. This pattern is outdated, the stitching is uneven, and honestly, the color choices are questionable at best. I nodded, picking up a piece of the fabric she'd discarded. The quilt she was destroying was actually a clever replica I'd made specifically for this moment. After years of Margaret's not-so-subtle hints about fixing my grandmother's work, I prepared for the inevitable. The real heirloom was safely stored in a climate-controlled unit across town, along with Grandma's other precious pieces. The Heritage Festival is in 3 days, Margaret announced, pulling out her own expensive fabrics. I'll rework this into something presentable. The Wells family has won the quilting competition for the past 5 years, and I won't let that streak end because of inferior materials. I watched as she began laying out her design, all sharp angles and modern patterns, nothing like the intricate flowing designs my grandmother had created. Margaret's quilts were technically perfect, machine precise, and utterly soulless. She'd never understood that quilting wasn't just about perfect stitches. It was about telling a story through fabric and thread. Would you like help? I offered, knowing her answer before she spoke. Oh no, dear, she said with false sweetness. Why don't you focus on the bake sale instead? Simple things are more your speed. I left her craft room, my phone buzzing with a text from David. Mom's still improving things. My husband knew all about his mother's attempts to remake me into her idea of a proper Wells wife. He'd offered to intervene countless times, but I'd always declined. Some battles were worth fighting quietly. Just fixing Grandma's quilt, I texted back. Everything's going according to plan. Later that evening, as Margaret proudly showed off her progress to David and his father George, I slipped away to my craft room. Hidden behind panels of fabric samples and sewing supplies was a small safe. Inside lay my real entry for the Heritage Festival, a quilt I'd spent the past year creating, incorporating every technique my grandmother had taught me. The pattern seemed simple at first glance, a traditional tree of life design rendered in subtle shades of blue, green, and gold. But within the pattern, visible only to those who knew where to look, was Rose Mitchell's signature technique. Each stitch told a story, creating a secondary pattern that emerged only when the light hit it just right. It was more than a quilt. It was a piece of my history, my grandmother's legacy woven into every careful stitch. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Susan, the Heritage Festival's head judge. Everything set for Friday, your grandmother would be proud. I smiled, remembering the last conversation I'd had with Grandma Rose before she passed away 2 years ago. She'd made me promise to keep our family's quilting tradition alive, but to do it my way. Patience and precision, dear, she'd said, her hands shaking but still able to demonstrate the special stitch one last time. Those who know will know. Margaret's voice carried down the hallway, discussing her plans to display her improved version of my family quilt. It'll be a surprise for everyone, she declared. No one will expect such a modern take on a traditional pattern. Linda will thank me when we win. I closed my safe quietly, touching the simple gold locket I always wore, the one containing a small piece of my grandmother's first quilt. Oh, Margaret, I whispered to myself, you have no idea how right you are about the surprises in store at the festival. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Margaret worked feverishly on her improvement project, completely transforming what she thought was my family heirloom into something unrecognizable. I kept myself busy helping with festival preparations, setting up display areas, and carefully avoiding any mention of quilts or competitions. The evening before the festival, as I carefully packed my real entry away, David came into our room. Mom's finally finished, he said, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. She wants everyone to see it at breakfast tomorrow before we head to the festival. I leaned into his embrace, feeling the rumble of his laugh. You're really going to let her show that thing to everyone? Sometimes, I said, echoing my grandmother's wisdom, the best lessons come from letting people believe they've won. David kissed the top of my head. Rose Mitchell's granddaughter through and through. Mom has no idea what's coming, does she? I smiled, thinking of the judges' faces when they'd seen my test pieces of the quiet arrangements we'd made for the festival's special exhibition. Let's just say the Heritage Festival is going to be very interesting this year. The morning of the Heritage Festival dawned bright and clear. I sat at Margaret's immaculate dining room table, watching her unveil her masterpiece to the family. The quilt she created from the remnants of my decoy was exactly what I'd expected, technically perfect and completely devoid of character. Notice how I've modernized the dated pattern, Margaret explained, gesturing to the sharp geometric shapes she'd incorporated. The judges will appreciate the innovation. It's a perfect blend of traditional and contemporary. She paused, fixing me with a pointed look. Much better than the original, don't you think, Linda? David squeezed my hand under the table as I nodded pleasantly. It's certainly different, I replied, causing my father-in-law George to hide a smile behind his coffee cup. Unlike his wife, George had always treated me with quiet kindness. He even confided once that I reminded him of his own mother, who had also preferred working with her hands to attending social functions. Different. Margaret's eyes narrowed. It's exceptional. The Wells family has a reputation to uphold at the festival. We can't have subpar work associated with our name. I thought about my quilt, carefully packed away in its acid-free box. Grandma Rose had always said that true craftsmanship speaks for itself. No need for grand announcements or self-promotion. The quality of the work would always shine through to those who understood it. The Heritage Festival was already bustling when we arrived. The town square had been transformed with white tents and colorful banners, the air filled with the scent of kettle corn and the sound of bluegrass music. Margaret immediately commandeered several volunteers to help her set up her display, positioning her quilt prominently in the center of the Wells family booth. Linda, she called out, make yourself useful and hand out these promotional cards. People should know where this piece came from. The cards, I noticed, made no mention of my grandmother's original work, crediting only Margaret Wells for the design. Actually, I said, checking my phone, I'm needed at the registration tent. They're short-handed this morning. Before Margaret could protest, I slipped away through the crowd. Instead of heading to registration, I made my way to a small tent at the far end of the square. Susan, the head judge, was waiting for me. Everything's ready, she said, helping me unpack my quilt. The special exhibition space is prepared exactly as we discussed. We carefully hung my piece, adjusting the lighting until it was perfect. In the proper light, my grandmother's signature pattern emerged. Subtle variations in the stitching that created a secondary design, visible only to those who knew what to look for. It was like a secret language, passed down through generations of women in my family. Rose would be so proud, Susan murmured, stepping back to admire the work. I remember when she taught at the college's textile program. None of us could ever quite figure out how she achieved this effect. I smiled, remembering countless hours spent practicing with my grandmother, her patient hands guiding mine through the complex stitching pattern. It took me years to master it, I admitted. Every time I thought I had it, she'd show me something new, some tiny detail I'd missed. Back at the main exhibition area, Margaret was holding court, describing her innovative techniques to a group of polite listeners. I caught David's eye and winked, our signal that everything was in place. The judging began at noon. Margaret stood proudly by her display, confident in her inevitable victory. I watched as the judges made their rounds, taking notes and examining each entry carefully. When they reached Margaret's quilt, she launched into her prepared speech about modernizing traditional patterns. "And where did the original design come from?" one judge asked, adjusting her glasses. "Oh, it was just an old family piece," Margaret said dismissively. "Quite primitive, really. I saw the potential and gave it the refinement it needed." The judge made a non-committal noise and moved on, leaving Margaret slightly flustered. This wasn't following her usual script of effusive praise and immediate recognition. At 2 o'clock, Susan took the stage for the special announcement we planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out over the festival grounds, "this year we have a unique privilege. Many of you may remember Rose Mitchell, whose quilts were legendary in our community." I saw Margaret's head snap up at the mention of my grandmother's name. "We're honored to present a special exhibition of Rose Mitchell's work, including a never-before-seen piece that demonstrates her famous hidden pattern technique." Susan paused, letting the murmur of excitement ripple through the crowd. "Even more special, this new work comes from her granddaughter, who has mastered Rose's unique method." The crowd began moving toward the small tent, Margaret among them, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief. I stayed back, watching as people filed in to view my quilt. From where I stood, I could hear the gasps of recognition from those who had known my grandmother's work, the excited whispers as they pointed out the subtle pattern emerging in the light. "It can't be," I heard Margaret say, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Linda doesn't, she couldn't." But I could and I had. Years of patience, practice, and quiet determination had led to this moment, not for revenge or triumph, but for honor. Honor of my grandmother's legacy, her art, and her wisdom. David appeared at my side, slipping an arm around my waist. "Should we go in?" he asked softly. I leaned into his embrace, watching as Margaret stood frozen before my quilt, her carefully constructed world of superiority crumbling around her. "Not yet," I said. "Let's give her a moment to process it all." Through the tent's opening, I could see my quilt catching the afternoon light, the hidden pattern shimmering like a secret finally revealed. Grandma Rose had always said that the best lessons come when we least expect them, and that true art speaks to the heart without needing to raise its voice. I touched my locket, feeling the small piece of my grandmother's first quilt safely tucked inside. Somewhere, I knew she was watching, and I hoped she was proud of how I'd chosen to reveal her legacy, not with anger or confrontation, but with the quiet confidence she had always taught me to embrace. The afternoon light filtered through the festival tents as I finally made my way to the special exhibition space. Margaret stood there, still staring at my quilt, her face a complex mixture of emotions. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. "The secret is in the tension of each stitch," I said quietly, moving to stand beside her. Grandma Rose spent years perfecting it. She said the trick was knowing exactly how much pressure to apply. Too much, and the pattern becomes obvious. Too little, and it disappears completely. Margaret turned to me, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something different in her eyes. Not judgment or criticism, but a glimmer of understanding. "The one I modified," she said hesitantly. "It wasn't the real one, was it?" I shook my head. "No, I knew how much you wanted to improve my grandmother's work, so I made a replica. The original is safe, along with her other pieces." "Why did you ever say anything About your skills, about Rose's technique. I thought carefully before answering. Grandma always said that true mastery doesn't need to announce itself. She taught me that sometimes the quietest voice carries the most weight. Susan approached us, her judge's clipboard in hand. Linda, would you mind explaining the technique to our visitors? We have quite a crowd gathering. For the next hour, I demonstrated the basics of the stitching pattern, carefully explaining how each element worked together to create the hidden design. Margaret stayed at the back of the group, watching intently as I worked. I could see her hands moving slightly, unconsciously mimicking the motions I was showing. Later, as the festival was winding down and the awards were being announced, Margaret approached me again. She held her honorable mention ribbon, twisting it between her fingers. I've been thinking, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Your grandmother, she taught at the college? Yes, in the textile arts program. She loved sharing her knowledge with anyone who wanted to learn. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Do you teach? The question caught me off guard. Sometimes. Small groups usually, people who are interested in traditional techniques. Would you consider, she paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Would you consider teaching me? The real way, I mean, not just the surface level stuff I've been doing. I studied my mother-in-law's face, seeing past the perfect makeup and carefully maintained exterior to something vulnerable underneath. It's not easy, I warned. It takes patience, practice, and a willingness to make mistakes. I know, she said quietly, but I think it's time I learned. David found us sitting together at my demonstration table, where I was showing Margaret the basic framework of my grandmother's technique. He raised his eyebrows in surprise but smiled warmly. Mom, he said, they're asking for all the winners to gather for photos. Margaret looked at her honorable mention ribbon, then at my best in show award. You go ahead, Linda. You earned it. Actually, I said, standing up, why don't you come with me? We can talk more about those lessons afterward. As we walked together toward the photography area, I touched the locket at my neck, thinking of Grandma Rose. She'd always insisted that the true value of any skill lay not in keeping it to yourself, but in sharing it with others, even those who might have once dismissed it. The festival ended as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town square. As we packed up our quilts and displays, Margaret helped me carefully fold my winning piece. You know, she said, smoothing the fabric with unexpected gentleness, I always wondered why Rose Mitchell never entered competitions. Now I understand. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I smiled, remembering my grandmother's quiet confidence. She used to say that competitions were just one way to measure success. The real achievement was in creating something that would last, something that would tell our stories long after we're gone. That evening, as David and I drove home, he reached over and squeezed my hand. You've changed something in her, you know. I've never seen Mom willing to admit she has something to learn. I thought about Margaret's requests for lessons, about the genuine interest I'd seen in her eyes as I demonstrated the stitching technique. Sometimes people just need to be shown a different way of seeing things. The next morning, I received a text from Margaret. When can we start the lessons? I smiled as I typed my reply, thinking of Grandma Rose and her patient teachings. Some traditions weren't meant to be modernized or improved, but rather preserved and passed on with love and understanding. As I set up my sewing room for Margaret's first lesson, I knew that while the stitches might not be perfect at first, we were creating something more valuable than just another quilt. We were stitching together a new chapter in our family's story. And somewhere, I was sure, Grandma Rose was smiling. The church bells tolled softly as I stood at my mother's casket, my heart breaking not just from grief, but from the betrayal unfolding before me. My sister-in-law Sophia's voice cut through the somber silence like a knife. Since we're all gathered here, she announced, her voice dripping with false sympathy, James wants everyone to know he's found true happiness with Amanda. They don't need marriage papers or legal complications. The gathered mourners gasped. My husband James, standing next to his mistress Amanda, didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just smirked, his hand resting possessively on her waist. I remained silent, tears falling freely now, not for him, but for my mother who'd warned me about James just weeks before she passed. My name is Elizabeth, and at 34, I never imagined I'd be burying my mother and losing my husband on the same day. But perhaps I should start from the beginning, from the moment I first suspected something was wrong. 3 months ago, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. During one of her lucid moments in the hospital, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "The church cameras, Elizabeth. Check the security footage. James, Sophia, they're planning something." I dismissed her words as medication-induced paranoia. James had been distant, yes, but I attributed it to stress. He'd been working late, taking mysterious calls, and spending more time with his sister Sophia. I was too focused on my mother's deteriorating health to question it deeply, but Mom kept insisting. "Promise me you'll check," she pleaded. Even in her final days, she was trying to protect me, so I promised, more to ease her mind than anything else. The night before the funeral, I couldn't sleep. My mother's words haunted me. At 2 a.m., I drove to the church where she'd been a devoted member for 30 years. Father Michael, who'd known my mother for decades, was still awake, preparing for the service. "Elizabeth," he said, his face etched with concern. "I was going to call you tomorrow. There's something you should see." He led me to his office and pulled up the security footage from the past month. My hands trembled as I watched the scenes unfold on his computer screen. There was James meeting with Sophia and a blonde woman, Amanda, in the church garden late at night. Their voices were clear through the high-quality audio system my mother had helped the church install last year. "Everything's arranged," Sophia was saying. "We'll announce it at the funeral. Elizabeth will be too devastated about her mother to make a scene, and since there's no marriage registration or proper documentation, she can't claim anything." James laughed. "Perfect timing. She's been so distracted with her dying mother, she hasn't even noticed I've moved most of my assets. Amanda and I can start fresh, no legal ties, no messy divorce." Amanda's voice was sickeningly sweet. "What about the house? It's in both their names, isn't it?" "Don't worry," Sophia assured her. "I've got a plan for that too. By the time Elizabeth realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." I watched multiple meetings, each one revealing more of their calculated plan. They'd chosen my mother's funeral as the perfect moment to humiliate me, believing my grief would render me powerless to respond. Father Michael placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Your mother noticed them meeting here. She couldn't prove anything, but she knew something was wrong. That's why she insisted on upgrading the security system last month. She wanted to protect you, even after she was gone." I sat there, numb with shock, but also filled with a strange sense of calm. My mother, even in her final weeks, had been working to expose their betrayal. She'd known somehow and had laid the groundwork for me to discover the truth. "I've saved copies of everything," Father Michael said quietly. "Your mother made me promise to keep them safe. She also left something else for you." He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter and a USB drive. My mother's handwriting, shaky but determined, filled the page. "My dearest Elizabeth, if you're reading this, my suspicions were right. I've watched James and Sophia plotting in our church, desecrating this sacred space with their schemes. But darling, I've made sure you're protected. The USB contains account statements, property deeds, and other documents you'll need. I've also recorded conversations I overheard between them when they visited me in the hospital, thinking I was too medicated to understand. Don't let them see you break. You're stronger than they know. When they make their move, remember, I've given you everything you need to fight back. All my love." Mom, Father Michael helped me review the contents of the USB drive. My mother, despite her illness, had meticulously documented everything. She even hired a private investigator to track James' financial movements over the past 6 months. So now, standing at her funeral, watching Sophia's dramatic announcement, I felt my mother's strength flowing through me. James thought he timed this perfectly, announcing his betrayal when I was at my lowest point. He thought my grief would silence me. But my mother, my brilliant, forward-thinking mother, had ensured I wouldn't face this alone. As Sophia finished her announcement, I wiped my tears and straightened my shoulders. The security cameras were still recording, capturing every moment of their cruelty. James stepped forward, probably expecting me to crumble. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice patronizing, "I hope you understand. These things happen." I looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. He had no idea what was coming. My mother's last gift to me wasn't just evidence. It was the strength to stand up for myself. "Yes, James," I replied softly. "These things do happen. And sometimes they're caught on camera." His smile faltered, just slightly, but enough to let me know my words had hit their mark. Sophia's triumphant expression wavered. But this was just the beginning. My mother had taught me well. Sometimes the best revenge is letting your enemies think they've won. right before you show them how badly they've lost. After the funeral, I maintained my composure as mourners offered their condolences, many avoiding eye contact after Sophia's shocking announcement. James and Amanda had already left, probably to celebrate their victory, while Sophia lingered, watching me with a smug smile. Back at my mother's house, I sat in her study, surrounded by the familiar scent of her perfume and decades of memories. The USB drive from my mother contained more than just security footage. There were detailed financial records, emails she'd intercepted between James and Sophia, and most importantly, a document that made my heart stop, proof that James had forged my signature on property transfer papers. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "I'll send someone to pack my things tomorrow. Don't make this difficult." I smiled, thinking about the cameras I'd installed throughout our house last week, following the trail of breadcrumbs my mother had left me. Sure enough, the footage showed James and Sophia entering our home multiple times while I was at the hospital, removing documents and valuables, discussing their plans in detail. The best part, Sophia had said in one recording, is that she doesn't even know the house is practically empty. We've been moving things out for weeks. James had laughed. "Elizabeth's too trusting. She never even checked the safe or the accounts. Amanda and I can start fresh, and she'll have nothing." What they didn't know was that my mother had already helped me secure the most important things. 3 weeks before she passed, she'd insisted I move all my important documents and family heirlooms to her house. "Just in case," she'd said with a knowing look. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Father Michael. "Elizabeth," he said gently, "there's something else your mother wanted you to know." He handed me another envelope. "She made me promise to give this to you after the funeral." Inside was a letter from my mother's lawyer, dated just 2 weeks ago. My hands trembled as I read it. My mother had transferred her house and considerable assets into a trust in my name, with explicit instructions that neither James nor his family could ever access it. "Your mother was a brilliant woman," Father Michael said. "She knew James would try to take everything, so she made sure you had a safe haven." I nodded, tears flowing freely now. Even in her final days, my mother had been protecting me, setting up a safety net I didn't even know I needed. The next morning, James arrived with Amanda and Sophia, pulling up in a moving truck. I watched through the window as they strutted up to the front door, clearly expecting to find me broken and defeated. "Elizabeth," James called out as they entered, "we're here for my things. Don't make this dramatic." I stepped out of the kitchen, calm and collected. "Of course not. But before you start, there's something you should see." I led them to the living room where I'd set up a large TV screen. Without a word, I pressed play. Their faces paled as they watched themselves on the security footage, discussing their plans in detail, laughing about deceiving me, plotting to strip me of everything. "You recorded us?" Sophia sputtered, her confidence cracking. "Actually, my mother did," I replied. "The church's security system, remember? The one she insisted on upgrading. She heard your late-night meetings, saw everything you planned." James stepped forward, his face darkening. "Those recordings won't hold up. There's no marriage registration, no proper documentation. You can't prove anything." I smiled, thinking of my mother's foresight. "That's where you're wrong, James. Let me show you something else." I played the footage from our house cameras, showing him and Sophia removing items, forging documents. Then I pulled out the file my mother's lawyer had prepared. "Forging my signature on property transfers? That's a serious crime," I said, watching their faces drain of color. "And there's more. Every late-night meeting, every fraudulent document, every conspiracy between you three, it's all documented." Amanda started backing away from James, her confident facade crumbling. "You said this would be simple," she hissed at him. "You said she wouldn't fight back." "They never thought I would," I said quietly. "That's why they chose my mother's funeral to make their announcement. They thought grief would make me weak." Sophia tried to regain control. "You're bluffing. You can't prove any of this." I turned to her, feeling a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "Would you like to explain to the police why you're on camera discussing how to defraud me? Or should we start with the forged documents?" James's face had turned ashen. He knew I had him cornered. My mother hadn't just left me evidence, she'd left me the power to destroy their carefully constructed plan. "Get out," I said calmly. "All of you. My lawyer will be in touch about the stolen property and forged documents." Standing in the doorway of my mother's house, My house now. I watched them retreat, their grand scheme crumbling around them. My mother's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "Never let them see you break, darling. Show them what you're made of." And that's exactly what I intended to do. 3 months after the funeral, I sat in my lawyer's office, watching James and Sophia squirm as the evidence mounted against them. The police investigation had uncovered even more than my mother's recordings: bank transfers, forged documents, and a trail of premeditated fraud that spanned months. Amanda had already turned on them, providing a detailed statement about their plans in exchange for immunity. She'd revealed how James had promised her a luxurious life with my assets, how Sophia had orchestrated the timing of their announcement to cause maximum humiliation. Your mother, my lawyer said, sliding another document across the desk, was thorough in her documentation. She even recorded their conversations during her hospital stays when they thought she was sedated. The recordings were damning. James and Sophia discussing their plans beside my dying mother's bed, not realizing she was alert and recording everything on her phone. Their cruelty had been their undoing. James attempted one last manipulation. "Elizabeth," he pleaded, "we can work this out. Think about our history together." I thought about our history all right, how he'd planned to leave me destitute, how he conspired with his sister to humiliate me at my mother's funeral, how they'd laughed about my trust and grief. "The only thing we're working out," I replied calmly, "is how much you'll be paying in restitution." Sophia, her designer outfit now wrinkled from stress, attempted to intervene. "This is ridiculous. We're family." "Family?" I turned to her. "Family doesn't plot to steal someone's home. Family doesn't use a mother's funeral to hurt her daughter. You're not family, you're criminals." The evidence was irrefutable. James faced charges for fraud and forgery. Sophia was implicated in conspiracy and theft. Their carefully constructed plan had crumbled, leaving them facing serious legal consequences. My mother's house became my sanctuary as I rebuilt my life. I discovered she'd left me more than just evidence. She'd left me a legacy of strength. The trust she'd set up protected not just her assets, but also contained letters of encouragement, advice, and love. "Remember," she'd written, "sometimes people show you who they really are. Believe them the first time, but be smarter than they expect." One evening, as I sorted through old photos in the study, I found a final note from her. "Dearest Elizabeth, by now you've probably faced their betrayal head-on. I'm sorry I couldn't shield you from their cruelty, but I could prepare you for it. You're stronger than James or Sophia ever imagined. Their mistake was underestimating you and me. I've watched you grow into an amazing woman. Don't let their actions dim your light. Sometimes losing people who betray us is actually a gain. You're free now, darling. Build the life you deserve. All my love, Mom." 6 months later, I stood in my mother's garden, now blooming with the roses she loved. James and Sophia had both taken plea deals, avoiding jail time but facing significant financial penalties and probation. Amanda had moved to another state, her dreams of luxury destroyed by her own testimony. Father Michael visited occasionally, bringing updates from the church community and sharing stories about my mother. "She would be proud," he said one afternoon, "not just of how you handled everything, but of who you've become because of it." I transformed my mother's house into a sanctuary for women escaping difficult situations, honoring her memory by helping others find their strength. The security cameras that had caught James and Sophia's betrayal now protected women rebuilding their lives. Last week, I received a letter from Sophia. She was apologizing, claiming she regretted everything. I placed it unopened in a box with James's similar attempts at reconciliation. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. My mother's last gift hadn't just been the evidence to fight back, it had been the wisdom to know my worth. She taught me that sometimes the biggest betrayals lead to the most profound freedom. Standing in her garden, surrounded by the blooming life she planted, I felt at peace. James and Sophia had thought they could break me by choosing my darkest moment to strike. Instead, they'd unleash a strength they never knew I possessed. A strength my mother had always seen in me, had carefully nurtured, and had protected even from beyond. In trying to destroy me, they'd actually set me free. And that, perhaps, was the greatest justice of all. My mother's voice seemed to whisper in the evening breeze. "See, darling, sometimes the best revenge is living well." And that's exactly what I intended to do: live well, help others, and honor the incredible woman who taught me that true strength often comes disguised as betrayal. The security cameras still recorded, But now they captured stories of healing and hope. My mother would have liked that, turning instruments of protection into tools of transformation. In the end, her legacy wasn't just about surviving betrayal, it was about thriving despite it.